Good evening. The Prime Minister has said it is the moral duty of parents to send their children to school when classrooms in England reopen next week. Boris Johnson said the risk to children of developing coronavirus was very small and that it was far more damaging for their development to stay away any longer. It comes as some head teachers spoke out, saying there'd been insufficient guidance or funding to help them prepare. For many pupils in Northern Ireland, the autumn term started today. In Wales, they go back next week. And in Scotland, where pupils have been back for 2 weeks, the use of face coverings in secondary schools, in corridors and communal areas is set to be introduced. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, with our first report this evening, here's our Education Editor Branwen Jeffreys.
The first day back for some in Northern Ireland. Relief at seeing friends again.
I was ready to come back to school from about the 1st of April, so I'm just so excited to have everyone back and try and have as normal year as possible.
We have to remember it's not going to be the same for a while, and we need to keep in place all the safety protocols and stuff.
New routines and social distancing, face coverings where that's not possible. Reassuring for parents too.
A bit nervous, but I know the school is a good school and they just need to follow the rules. That's what I keep telling her, just to listen to what everybody else is saying.
In England, it's his job to get schools open next week. A promise today, children will keep learning.
In our guidance, what we've asked schools to do is make sure that they're planning to ensure there's actually children don't miss out from their education if they're not in school and they're continuing to educate when they're at home.
So if a child shows symptoms, they're sent home to isolate and to be tested. Close contacts are asked to isolate and be tested. Mobile testing units will be sent by health officials if a wider outbreak is suspected. But Birmingham is on high COVID alert. Restrictions increased over the weekend. These students hope to start sixth form next week.
I think it's going to be difficult at first with the social distancing and the COVID, and just knowing how this is all going to come together.
The human interaction helps us. It helps us remember the content that we're being taught, and like if someone else in a class struggles, we can kind of help each other, and I think that's what works better than being online all the time.
I think it'll be hard readjusting to an academic environment, but I think that'll be the same for students up and down the country.
So how are you going to manage? The school is going to stagger start times. Most pupils get here by bus and train, but they need more advice to plan for the challenges ahead.
We haven't had a local lockdown whilst schools have been fully open, so I don't know what that will look like or feel like. I hope that schools become a priority, and if we can lock down other things and still enable schools to open, I think pupils really, really need to be in school with their teachers.
Birmingham is just one step away from having to go back into lockdown. Schools in areas like this, where cases have been rising, want much clearer advice about what would happen. I understand the government is looking at a range of contingency measures, and that could include schools operating on a rota basis in areas where cases are high. Secondary schools more likely to face extra measures. Teenagers are closer to adults in transmitting the virus. To get pupils back, one union leader told me, ministers need to be realistic.
So we're consulting with government on this. Government are consulting with us about the possibilities of how schools are going to run in that area. It's really important that head teachers know what those plans are, that parents know what those plans are. Actually, it will give confidence to parents to send their children back.
More guidelines are expected, but will they arrive before schools open? Branwen Jeffreys, BBC News, Birmingham.
Well, as we said earlier, face coverings look set to be made compulsory in Scottish secondary schools, in corridors and communal areas, with the government in the final stages of consulting teachers and local authorities on the plans. Some schools are already advising students to wear face coverings, as Lorna reports.
Scottish schooling in the time of COVID. Here in Inverclyde, older secondary school pupils are already being encouraged to wear face coverings in areas where physical distancing is hard.
It'd be perfect if we didn't need to wear face masks, but however, it keeps us safer. You know, children, they want to talk to each other, they do want to step into that 2 metre zone, and so if they're wearing face masks, it's a bit better.
The challenge has been this: crowded corridors during brief crossover times between lessons. The Scottish Government now looking to bring in guidance nationwide.
The Education Secretary is in the final stages of consulting with teachers and local authorities on a recommendation for the use of face coverings by staff and pupils in secondary schools when they are moving around in corridors and communal areas.
Ahead of every class, hands are cleaned, tables wiped. Pupils now sitting facing forward in the same direction.
Okay, class, study time.
This area has the highest rate of deaths from COVID in Scotland. Pupils here say they understand why the new rules are being introduced.
I feel like we needed them from the start, but now that we've been advised to use them now, going through the corridors and at break and lunch, I feel like it's a good thing.
How are you finding it?
It's a bit hard to talk, but it's fine. It's fine for me anyway.
A number of community-based COVID clusters have been confirmed among pupils and staff at Scottish schools. More than 24 cases now linked to Kings Park School in Dundee. Parents here in Inverclyde in the main supportive of the latest moves to keep children safe.
I'm all for it. I sent them into school anyway with the face masks, originally hoping that they would choose to wear them themselves. So I think it's a good idea.
He has asthma, so I don't know how comfortable I'll be with that for him wearing it for long periods of time. But I'm not opposed to it in principle.
We were talking inside about what satellites were.
Another change, learning outdoors is now actively encouraged. When the colder weather comes, that may become a challenge, one of many for teachers and government who say safety is a top priority, and so too is keeping children in full-time education. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Inverclyde Academy in Greenock.
So who is most at risk with the full reopening of schools? Is it the children or their teachers and parents? Here's our science editor, David Shukman.
The role of schools in the pandemic is a highly sensitive question and hard to answer because so many different factors are involved. First of all, what are the risks to children themselves? Well, there's more and more evidence that if they catch the virus, children are very unlikely to come to any harm. But what's still unknown is how easily they might pass it on.
I think the risk to the individual children is very low. We know that children aren't getting sick with COVID-19 at anything like the rates of adults. However, there is this concern that students may pass it to one another in the school ground or in the classroom, and then that student goes home with a new infection and introduces them to their household, and so that's a way of spreading the virus through the community.
So what are the risks to other people at schools and beyond? Older staff may be more concerned. That's why safety measures are so important, keeping apart and maintaining clean hands. When the school gates do eventually reopen, scientists say it's very likely that there will be an increase in the number of infections because public transport will become busier and parents will be able to get back to their places of work, all of which creates more chances for the virus to spread. So the message is that when schools are back, the rest of us need to be even more careful. We found a range of views on all this in Warrington.
I really want them to go back. I think they are missing it, but I'm not 100% confident that the right precautions are getting put in place.
I do feel it's better that they go back to school, obviously, for education purposes. But obviously we're all frightened, all the family, of the coronavirus, and obviously the children bringing it back into the home.
I think it's starting to affect some children, not being able to get out and meet their friends and move about in general like they usually do. So yeah, I really do think they do need to go back to school.
And there are lessons from other countries that have already reopened their schools. Denmark was the first to try in Europe. It already had a low level of infections. Children were told to socially distance in class, while parents were kept fully involved and knew that care was needed. In Germany, many schools insist on masks in the classrooms. Even so, there have been outbreaks, but the risks are judged to be worth it for the sake of the children. David Shukman, BBC News.